minority side for bringing this forward. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Maine yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 2189 is a strong step forward in helping to resolve the severe backlog of disability claims that exist today at the Department of Veterans Affairs. I thank all the members of our committee for their bipartisan work on this bill, and I urge my colleagues to join us in passing H.R. 2189 as amended. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 2189 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no.
Speaker.
Of the chair, two-thirds have being in the affirmative.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker,
what the gentleman from Maine seek correctness?
I demand the yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. Is it a sufficient number having arisen? The yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2481 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 152, H.R. 2481, a bill to amend Title 38 the United States Code to codify and improve the election requirements for the receipt of educational assistance under the Post-9/11 Educational Assistance Program of the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller, the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Michaud, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members would have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks and add any extraneous material they may have on H.R. 2481 as amended.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I might consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
H.R. 2481 represents the collective work of our Economic Opportunity Subcommittee. Provisions of this bill streamline eligibility for Veterans GI Bill benefits that would ensure that surviving loved ones of service members who die as a result of service have all the educational assistance benefits that they are entitled to, and make improvements to the Service Members Civil Relief Act. I know other members are here today to speak on provisions of this bill that they've authored, so at this time I'll focus on just a few areas. Section 4 and 5 of the bill would establish within existing resources a Veterans Economic Opportunity Administration at the Department of Veterans Affairs as an undersecretary to head the effort. The purpose of creating a parallel administration is to serve alongside VA's Veteran Benefits Administration, the Veterans Health Administration, and the National Cemetery Administration. It is to raise in importance the issues affecting veterans' readjustment to civilian life. Too often, these issues, such as education, job training, and vocational counseling, do not receive the focus that they deserve because they are subsumed within an administration that also has responsibility for disability claims processing. Highlighting and emphasizing the importance of jobs and careers for veterans was an important reason why the Committee on Veterans Affairs created for itself a separate Economic Opportunity Subcommittee several years ago. These provisions would advance the same model within the Department of Veterans Affairs. It's my hope that the new Undersecretary for Economic Opportunity would be a powerful advocate serving veterans' readjustment interests, whether at school, during TAP transition classes for departing service members, or as a liaison with the Department of Labor's Veterans Employment and Training Service. The second provision I'd like to touch was authored by the late C.W. Bill Young. It would permit the children of certain severely disabled service members who die shortly after their military service and who have received a Purple Heart to be eligible for the Frye Educational Scholarship. The Fry Scholarship provides certain post-9/11 GI Bill benefits for the children of service members, but only those who die on active duty. Chairman Young rightly believed that the kids of those who may have been mortally wounded in service but who died shortly thereafter ought to be eligible for this benefit as well. I'm honored to say that Section 7 of the bill carries forward Bill Young's provision and that his memory lives on in our work today in this legislation. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support H.R. 2481 as amended, the Veterans Economic Opportunity Act of 2013, and yield myself such time as I may
The
consume.
gentleman is recognized for time as he may consume.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 2481 as amended makes several significant improvements to VA structure as well as several benefits programs. This bill represents the work of members of both on and off the Veterans Affairs Committee to improve veterans' lives. I want to take a few minutes to highlight two of the key provisions of this measure. Mr. Cummings of Maryland originally introduced H.R. 1842, the Military Family Home Protection Act. Language from this measure is included in H.R. 2481 as amended and aims to strengthen the Service Member Civil Relief Act foreclosure protection for service members and their families during the course of deployment, regardless of when the home was purchased. Military homeowners deserve these protections so they can have peace of mind while they serve. We all have heard the horror stories of families fighting for their homes and sadly losing their homes while the family members were in harm's way in Iraq or Afghanistan. The 5-year extension of the Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program in this bill is vital to veterans. There are still approximately 62,000 homeless veterans on the streets each night. This program provides services to assist the reintegration in reintegrating them into the meaningful employment in the labor force. The HVRP is the only nationwide program that focuses on assisting homeless veterans by connecting them to employment. If we were to meet the goal of ending homeless veterans by 2015, we need to extend the help that's included in this bill. And I strongly support H.R. 2481 as amended, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I yield for 5 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, the chairman of the subcommittee on economic opportunity, Mr. Flores.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of H.R. 2481 as amended, and I thank Chairman Miller for allowing me to express my support for this bill today. This bill contains the original text of the Veterans GI Bill Enrollment Clarification Act of 2013, which I introduced in June, as well as the collective work of the subcommittee that I'm honored to chair, the Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity. I want to thank the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity, Mr. Takano, as well as Chairman Miller and ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Michaud, for bringing this bill to the floor. Finally, I also thank the other members of the committee who authored the provisions that are included in this bill for their thoughtful legislation. Mr. Speaker, Sections 4 and 5, originally authorized by Chairman Miller, would authorize using existing VA resources for the creation of a fourth administration VA, which will improve oversight over VA's education, vocational rehabilitation, and home loan programs, and their Center for Veterans Enterprise. Too often these programs are overshadowed by VA's efforts to reduce the disability claims backlog, and I am hopeful that this new fourth administration will streamline oversight over these important VA programs that will help veterans reach economic success. Section 6 includes Mr. Cook's bill that would extend the Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program, which provides grant funding for job training services for homeless veterans. Section 7 includes a bill authorized by our late colleague, Mr. Young of Florida. This section would modify the Fry Scholarship Program to include the children of certain veterans who die within 31 days of discharge from a service-connected cause. This is an issue that I know Mr. Young was personally passionate about, and I am thankful that we were able to include it in this bill that's being considered today. Section 8 includes the original text of my bill, H.R. 2481, that would clarify the process to assist veterans in choosing the best GI Bill benefit to meet their unique education needs. I believe that by making this one small change, we can reduce veterans' wait times and streamline their use of the veterans that they have earned. Section 9 reflects a bill introduced by Mr. Calvert and co-sponsored by Mr. Takano to streamline the reporting of student data by college consortiums. Section 10 would extend several existing VA loan guarantee funding fees to provide cut-go funding offsets for the cost of the bill. Sections 11 and 12 contain the provisions of Mr. Cummings' bill to expand several mortgage, foreclosure, and refinancing-related protections and rights in the Service Members Civil Relief Act to surviving spouses and active duty members. The section would also clarify refinancing options available for service members as well as penalties for violations of the SCRA law. I want to thank Mr. Cummings and his staff for working with us on this section over the past year. I believe these provisions would go a long way in protecting service members and their families. The final section would amend SCRA to protect child custody agreements of service members while they are deployed. This provision, sponsored by Mr. Turner, has passed the House multiple times in the last few Congresses, and it is designed to ensure that military service doesn't impact existing child custody agreements unless it is in the best interest of the child. Once again, I thank all of the members for their thoughtful contributions to this bill, and I encourage its passage. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Maine, the ranking member of our committee, for yielding time, and I thank Chairman Flores of the subcommittee for his hard work. I'm pleased to see that the Veterans Economic Opportunity Act of 2013 is receiving a vote today on the floor, as every member of this distinguished body has service members in his or her congressional district, and all of us believe that taking care of these heroes when they complete their service should be a top priority. Bipartisanship in this Congress is rare, but Republicans and Democrats all agree that Congress should be making it easier for our service members as they transition back to civilian life. The House Veterans Affairs Committee has a strong track record of being the least partisan committee in Congress, and this very bill is consistent with that record as it passed in committee unanimously this past September. I'm especially proud that H.R. 331, which I originally introduced with my Republican colleague, Representative Calvert, was included in the final legislation. With Riverside Community College District campuses in both of our congressional districts, and with Riverside County having the 8th largest veterans population in the country, I'm proud that Representative Calvert and I joined forces to make it easier for veterans to receive their veteran education benefits. Our legislation will help decrease education benefit processing times by eliminating unnecessary and duplicative paperwork for individual community colleges that are part of a group, district, or consortium. Specifically, it will allow a multi-college system, such as the Riverside Community College District, to verify a student's class enrollment number with the Department of Veterans Affairs instead of requiring each individual constituent college to do so. Centralizing the reporting for veterans enrollment at multi-college systems will be a great benefit to veterans in the Inland Empire, as unnecessary and duplicative paperwork delays benefits, increases processing time, and increases costs to the Department of Veterans Affairs and multi-college systems such as the Riverside Community College District. I'm also pleased to see the Military Family Home Protection Act, of which I was a lead co-sponsor, included in the final bill. This portion of the legislation will expand foreclosure protections to all service members regardless of when they purchased their home, and will stay home foreclosures for service members who are receiving hostile or imminent danger pay. It will also prohibit banks from discriminating against service members, veterans, and surviving spouses who are looking for home loans and mortgages. Finally, it will double civil penalties for mortgage-related violations. The veterans who so bravely serve this country deserve every opportunity for success and every protection possible. I thank my Republican colleagues from the Veterans Affairs Committee for pushing this legislation, and I look forward to its passage. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from California yields back. Gentleman from Florida.
I yield the gentleman from California 2 minutes, Mr. Calvert.
Gentleman is
you.
recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of the Veterans Opportunity Act of 2013. As our service members return home from war, it is incumbent upon all of us and all Americans to ensure that they're receiving the support and opportunities they need to succeed in civilian life. This bill establishes the Economic Opportunity Administration, which would focus its efforts entirely on veteran education, employment, small business, and housing. The bill also contains a text of legislation I introduced earlier this year along with my colleague, Representative Takano, which is vital to mine and his congressional district. For community college districts that have multiple colleges as part of the district, the Department of Veterans Affairs requires each campus to certify that their veteran students are enrolled for a specific number of classes before the VA will disperse student benefits. Under current regulations, each of the colleges in a district must write letters to other colleges within the district to verify their classes and meet regulations. The Riverside Community College District in Riverside, California, this unnecessary paperwork delays benefits to veterans and increases processing time and the costs to college districts as well as the VA. This bill, which was wrapped into H.R. 2481, corrects that problem by permitting each college in the district to verify and certify veterans for all classes attended within the district rather than just for classes attended at that particular college. H.R. 331 would update the rules, which would mean veterans would receive their benefits sooner and the VA would have less paperwork to process. I'd like to thank Subcommittee Chairman Flores and his staff, Ranking Member Takano, Full Committee Chairman Miller, and the Full Committee Ranking Member Michaud for their efforts to support our veterans and specifically for the Veterans Economic Opportunity Act. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of time.
The gentleman from California yields back. Gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the gentleman for yielding, and I want to thank Chairman Miller, Congressman Flores, Ranking Member Michaud, and Congressman Takano, and members of the House Veterans Affairs Committee for working together in a truly bipartisan way to include provisions in this legislation to extend home foreclosure provisions to our service members, veterans with disabilities, and surviving spouses. For the last 2 years, I've aggressively investigated illegal foreclosures, inflated fees, and other abuses by banks against our service members, veterans, and their families. In my opinion, no one is more deserving of our help than our service members who have sacrificed so much, who have given their blood, sweat, and tears, and sometimes their lives. Yet, under current law, certain service members, veterans with disabilities, and surviving spouses are not receiving the critical protections they need and truly deserve. As a result, banks are foreclosing on homes at the very moment when our heroes and their families deserve our support. As a country, we can and must do better. That is why I introduced H.R. 1842, the Military Family Home Protection Act, which the House Veterans Affairs Committee included in the bill before us today, and I am most grateful. These common sense provisions will better protect military families and veterans with disabilities by closing loopholes and providing needed reforms to the Service Members Civil Relief Act. These provisions are supported by the American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, Paralyzed Veterans of America, Disabled American Veterans, Military Officers Association of America, Gold Star Wives of America, and the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, all of whom have written strong letters of support. This legislation has overwhelming bipartisan support, and I thank every single member of the committee for their continued support. With Veterans Day approaching, I believe one of the best ways to honor our veterans and those that serve is to help keep a roof over their heads after they have sacrificed so much for our freedom and for our way of life. And I ask every member to support this effort And with that, I yield back.
Yields back. Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Dayton, Ohio, home of the United States Air Force Museum, Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the Chairman for his diligence on a provision of this bill that would include protecting the custody rights of our service members. I also want to thank the Ranking Member and the staff of the VA Committee for also being so diligent to include this provision. This provision has passed the House 5 times as part of the National Defense Authorization Act and 3 times as provisions coming from the VA Committee. It is an essential provision that would provide service members confidence and protection of their custody arrangements once they are deployed. Unbelievably, across this nation, family law court judges have been taking custody away from service members upon their return from deployment, using their time against them in deciding a custody case. There are even cases in our nation where the family law court judge took custody away based on the potential threat of deployment of service members. Now, I don't think anyone believes it's the best interest of the child for them to believe that there's something wrong with serving your country. We have a national military that needs a national standard. Men and women who are serving need to know what standard is going to be applied. Many of these cases have multiple state provisions. This does not provide federal jurisdiction for custody cases. It retains the state's authority on this, but merely provides a minimum standard upon which service members can rely that says that their custody decisions will not be based solely upon the issue of their past or future deployment. This is the minimum that we could do for our service members. This arises in part out of a case of Eva Slusher, who was a Kentucky National Guard member. Her daughter Sarah, she had raised for 6 years alone after divorce. Upon returning from deployment, the court awarded her ex-husband custody. She fought for 2 years and $25,000 later to get her daughter back. She should be the type of service member who knows that there is a standard when she returns, that her time away will not be used against her. This is important also so that service members, when they're making arrangements upon departure, do not have the anxiety when they're deployed that when they return they might not get their families back. Eva Slusher famously said, the service members' laws currently say that when I return I have to have my job back. They should say I get my child back.
Additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for additional 30 seconds.
Eva Slusher famously said that under the Service Members Civil Relief Act that she is required to get her job back when she returns. She believes under that act she should also be able to get her child back. With that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I would like to thank Chairman Miller for bringing this bill to the floor, as well as Chairman Flores and Ranking Member Takano of the Subcommittee on Economic Opportunities for their work on this particular bill, and encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support it unanimously. And with that, I yield back to balance my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Florida.
Again, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all the members of our committee for the bipartisan effort in bringing this piece of legislation to the floor. I would ask all members here to support this as we go forward with a vote and pass H.R. 2481 as amended. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 2481 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the title is amended to read as follows.
Amend the title so as to read, a bill to make certain improvements in the laws administered by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs relating to benefits and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1405 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 95, H.R. 1405, a bill to amend Title 38 United States Code to require the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to include an appeals form in any notice of decision issued for the denial of the benefits sought.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller, and the gentlewoman from Nevada, Ms. Titus, Each will control 20 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members would have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks and add any extraneous material they may have on H.R. 1405 as amended.
Without objection, so ordered.
And, Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I might consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I want to commend Ms. Titus for identifying another step in cleaning up the claims process. Her bill also includes provisions authored by former Sergeant Major of the Minnesota National Guard, Mr. Waltz, to provide honorary veteran status to members of the National Guard and Reserves. H.R. 1405 would also improve access to veterans' claims information by certain state and local government officials. And finally, the bill would revise the process by which fiduciary agents are assigned and limit the amount of bonuses that can be paid under Chapters 45 and 53 of Title V. Again, I know that there are other members who wish to speak in more detail on provisions of this bill, so at this time, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves what purpose is the gentlelady from Nevada seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 1405 as amended and yield myself such time as I may consume.
Lady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I introduced this legislation, H.R. 1405, to improve the Veterans Claims Appeals process. Currently, a veteran must exercise his or her appeals rights before the appeal process formally begins and the VA sends the required forms. H.R. 1405, as amended, requires the VA to include an appeals form with the notice of decision for every claim. This cuts out several steps and speeds up the appeals process. This common sense change will immediately reduce the time frame of the appeals process by 60 days. H.R. 1405 will also allow the VA to provide better customer service to those veterans who are already struggling with significant delays and bureaucratic challenges. This legislation is indeed a common sense improvement that will result in veterans in Southern Nevada receiving the benefits they have earned in a timely fashion. I constantly hear from those veterans in Las Vegas that the process is too complicated and takes too long. This change will eliminate an unnecessary bureaucratic step and speed up the process for those veterans and all our veterans across the country. H.R. 1405 as amended is supported by the VA and the Veterans Service organizations who came and testified. This piece of legislation also includes languages from 3 other bills, H.R. 679, the Honor America's Guard Reserve Retirees Act, introduced by Representative Waltz of Minnesota, Chairman Runyon's bill, H.R. 733, the Access to Veterans Benefits Improvements Act, and Mr. Johnson's bill, H.R. 894, to reform VA's fiduciary program. I want to thank the chairman of our subcommittee, Mr. Runyon, for moving this legislation through the subcommittee and for the bipartisan cooperation that guides our work on behalf of Nevada's veterans. I also want to thank the many veteran service organizations for their helpful input and for supporting this legislation. I will urge my colleagues to support passage of H.R. 1405. I thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves the balance of time. The gentleman from Florida.
Speaker, at this time I yield 2 minutes to the Subcommittee Chairman for Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Runyon.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chairman Miller, for yielding. I'm proud to have sponsored H.R. 733, the Access to Veterans Benefits Improvement Act, with my good friend and colleague, Mr. Tim Walls from Minnesota. This legislation, included in Section 3 of H.R. 1405, would provide certain local and state government employees access to case tracking information through the Department of Veterans Affairs. There is no doubt that we have a responsibility to veterans to ensure that every effort is made to simplify the claims process. Key to this effort are the county service veterans officers whose expertise in claims development helps the veterans in New Jersey and communities all across America. Veterans are often frustrated as they ask for help from a county service officer that this person acting on their behalf cannot directly access even the most basic information about the status of their claim. However, while looking to remedy that complication and broaden access to case tracking information, consideration must also be given to protection of veterans' private information. This balance is stricken in this bill. Mr. Speaker, I support Section 31 of H.R. 1405 along with all the other provisions contained within the bill, and I encourage all members to join me in support of the legislation. I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of time. The gentlewoman from Nevada.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Waltz, who brings incredible expertise and compassion to the committee as a decorated veteran himself.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank the chairman and the ranking member of the full committee and the subcommittees for doing exceptional work, for putting our veterans first, for bringing a package of common sense legislation to honor our nation's veterans and do it in the best and smartest manner we can. If the entire Congress functioned like the VA committee, I think the American public would be far better served. There's a provision in this bill that's very simple. It recognizes the service and sacrifice of members of the National Guard and Reserve. These are the men and women of our reserve component. They take the same oath of office. They do the same training. They and their families sacrifice their time, energy, and they stand on the ready at all times. They assist flood victims in Colorado and Minnesota. They fight fires across the western United States, and they stand ready to fight and defend this nation at a moment's notice. They truly are the Minutemen. I would guess that the vast majority of Americans and maybe members of this body don't recognize that you can serve 20 years doing that, and if you were not called to a specific Title X service, you cannot be considered a veteran. You can go to the VA hospital, you can use the GI Bill, you can be buried in a veteran cemetery, but you're technically a military retiree. This may seem like a small thing. It's not. The title of veteran means more than just a license plate you get from your state. It's something your neighbors know about. These people don't and should not have to explain that they're technically not a veteran. This piece of legislation, and I thank again the people who made this possible, simply corrects that. It doesn't, very seldom do we get a chance to do this. It doesn't add any cost, and it does the right thing. So it's not an added benefit, which were earned, by the way. It simply corrects this, puts it in line, and honors if you serve 20 or more years in uniform, you stand ready, you train people who went to war, we're going to give you the dignity and the honor of calling you a veteran. So I ask my colleagues to support this important package of legislation. This one small piece is the right thing to do. It's many, many years overdue, and I ask for the support of 1405. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I would like to yield 2 minutes to a former member of the VA committee, a 26-plus year veteran of the United States Air Force, Mr. Johnson, again for 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the chairman for recognizing me. I rise in strong support today of H.R. 1405, which, in addition to improving the disability claims appeals process for veterans, contains language from H.R. 894, legislation I introduced to provide necessary reforms to the Department of Veterans Affairs Fiduciary Program. In response to an investigation by the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, which I chaired in the last Congress, this legislation includes significant changes that will strengthen the VA's standards for administering the fiduciary program and increase protection for vulnerable veterans. Requiring background checks and lowering the fee a fiduciary can charge would increase scrutiny over fiduciaries and help root out potential predators. It also adds a layer of protection for veterans with fiduciaries by allowing veterans to petition to have their fiduciary removed and replaced. Importantly, it would also enable veterans to appeal their incompetency status at any time. That's a right not currently granted to veterans. I'd like to thank Chairman Runyon and Ranking Member Titus of the Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs Subcommittee for their support of this legislation. I urge my colleagues to support it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from Nevada.
Thank you. I reserve the balance of the time.
Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, we have no more requests for time, so we'll be prepared to close if Ms. Titus will go ahead and close.
The gentlelady from Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would urge my colleagues to join us in supporting H.R. 1405 as amended. I have no further speakers, so I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 1405, as amended, is yet another bipartisan bill that's been advanced out of our committee. I again thank all the members for their collaborative work on this bill, and I urge my colleagues to join us in passing H.R. 1405 as amended. I yield back.
And the gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1405 as amended? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the title is amended. For what purposes the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2011.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 155, H.R. 2011, the bill to amend Title 38 United States Code to provide for a 2-year extension of the Veterans Advisory Committee on Education.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller, and the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Michaud, each will control 20 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, again, I ask unanimous consent that all members would have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks and any extraneous material they may have on H.R. 2011.
Without objection, so ordered.
And, Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much. Having the right skills is one of the keys to finding a good job, and America's taxpayers are now providing the most valuable GI Bill benefit to veterans and dependents since World War II. To assist VA and the Congress in making sure that veterans' educational assistance benefits are meeting the needs of our veterans, Title 38 has established a committee to advise the Secretary on the needs of veteran students. The committee's statutory term will expire on December 31st of this year. H.R. 2011 would extend that term for 2 years, and I thank Mr. Delaney for bringing his bill forward to our committee. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 2011, the Veterans Advisory Committee on Education Improvement Act of 2013. Yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Veterans Advisory Committee on Education provides advice to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs on the administration of education and training programs for veterans and service members, reservists, and Guard personnel and dependents of veterans. The Advisory Committee is composed of veterans and persons who are eminent in their respective fields of education, labor, and management, and representative of institution and establishment furnishing education to veterans. Besides providing advice to the Secretary, the Advisory Committee recommends new educational benefit programs and services. It also plays a key role in the long-range planning and development of existing education benefits programs for our veterans. Mr. Speaker, as of post-9/11, GI Bill continues to evolve and being fully understood by VA, colleges, veterans, and their dependents. The Advisory Committee is crucial to full implementation and resolving lingering issues. The authority for the Advisory Committee on Education is slated to end on December 31st, 2013. H.R. 2011 would extend this authority for 2 years so that the Advisory Committee can continue to its important work in ensuring that veterans receive the full value of their educational benefits. I wish to thank Representative Delaney of Maryland for introducing this bill and Chairman Miller for bringing it to the floor today. I wish also to thank the Subcommittee Economic Opportunity Chairman of Flores and Ranking Member Takano for their hard work on this legislation. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Florida.
And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from the 16th District of Ohio, Mr. Renacci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I am honored to rise today with many of my colleagues who worked together as part of a bipartisan working group, including Mr. Carney, Mr. Heck, Mr. Delaney, and others, in strong support of H.R. 2011, the Veterans Advisory Committee on Education Improvement Act. It was my great pleasure to join my good friend from Maryland, Mr. Delaney, in introducing this legislation. Americans' veterans sacrifice dearly for this country, and I believe it is our obligation to help them once their service is complete. The Veterans Advisory Committee on Education was created in 1972 to advise the Secretary of Veterans Affairs on education and job training programs. Our legislation will not only continue the work of this valuable committee by reauthorizing it for 2 years, but it will also expand the committee to include representatives for those that served after September 11, 2001. Every military conflict has its own unique atrocities, and every generation of veterans faces a unique set of obstacles as they rejoin the civilian job market. For this reason, it is critical that we include members to represent those that served in Iraq and Afghanistan. As a member of Congress, I believe there is no greater cause than protecting and caring for our service men and women. I ask my colleagues to support H.R. 2011. Doing so will ensure that our troops receive the most effective education and training opportunities available. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Delaney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the ranking member for yielding. I also want to thank Chairman Miller and the rest of the Veterans Affairs Committee for their support during this committee process. The Veterans Affairs Committee does some of the most important work here in Congress and has long been applauded as a place where both parties work together. In that vein, our bill, H.R. 2011, the Veterans Advisory Committee on Education Improvement Act, is bipartisan legislation, which I was pleased to introduce with my colleague from Ohio, Congressman Renacci. H.R. 2011 is common-sense legislation designed to improve the VA's education and job training programs, and I'm proud that it is being considered on the House floor today. Mr. Speaker, one of the real privileges of our work in Congress is getting to meet so many dedicated servicemen and veterans and learn about the incredible work they've done to keep our country safe and defend our way of life. Likewise, in our district, one of the most essential services in our offices is to provide help to veterans so that they can earn the benefits that they deserve. And when we travel across our districts, what we see is the deep appreciation the American people have for her veterans. There is a reverence in their heroism and gratitude for their service. Mr. Speaker, the American people feel strongly that our veterans deserve to be repaid for their service. I believe that one of the most significant commitments that we can make to these servicemen is their education. Going back to 1944 with the first GI Bill, we've joined together as a nation and said that when our veterans come home, they're going to be able to receive the education they need. In today's high-tech global economy, that commitment is more important than ever. The veterans' unemployment rate is too low, especially for post-9/11 veterans. To give our veterans the best chance to succeed, we need to make sure that they have a voice in the VA. We need to make sure that our current benefit programs are working, and we need to make sure that our veterans' education programs are adapting to an ever-changing world. Mr. Speaker, this legislation does two very important things. First, it reauthorizes the Veterans Advisory Committee on Education through 2015. Absent congressional action, the Veterans Advisory Committee on Education will sunset this December. Second, this legislation updates U.S. code to ensure that the committee includes post-9/11 veterans. There are over 2 million post-9/11 veterans in the United States, and their perspectives need to be heard on the committee and at the VA. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to note that H.R. 2011 is supported by numerous important veterans organizations, including the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, the Military Officers Association of America, the Student Veterans Association, and the Veterans of Foreign Wars. I can't think of better endorsements than these. Mr. Speaker, helping our veterans transition to civilian life is one of the most critical challenges facing our country. These men and women are truly our country's heroes and deserve a world-class education. Our constituents feel strongly that this is something that we get right. I thank the ranking member for his time and urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, we have no more requests for time, so if my good friend Mr. Michaud is ready to close, we are.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers either, so I'd urge all my colleagues to support H.R. 2011. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Maine yields back. The gentleman from Florida.
I, too, ask our colleagues to join us in supporting H.R. 2011 and yield back the balance of my time.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 2011? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The gentleman from Maine.
Yeah, I'd request the ayes and nays.
The ayes and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the ayes and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. Sufficient number having risen, the ayes and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until approximately 6:30 p.m. today.
And members wrapping up debate there on 6 bills today, all dealing with veterans issues. And any votes requests will be taking place in about 45 minutes, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Later this week, let you know the House will be considering 2 bills dealing with financial regulations. One deals with broker-dealer conduct and the other with financial swaps. Also this week in the House, a measure disapproving of the debt ceiling increase that was approved earlier this month. And senior officials at the White House met this afternoon with leaders